Give us a call at 869-465-2555, Monday to Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 noon. One solid hour of in-depth analysis of the machinery that makes our country tick. The Edge, cutting into the matters at hand.
The views and opinions expressed by participants and callers during this program are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of ZIZ Broadcasting Corporation, its management, or sponsors. The station accepts no responsibility for statements made. Good morning, St. Kitts and Nevis, and welcome to The Edge here on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. I'm your host, Devonne Cornelius, and thank you for joining me on the program for today, Monday, March 3rd, 2025. It's the beginning of a new month, which means new opportunities, new adventures, and new things for you. And of course, the beginning of a new week. Thank you for joining me in the program for today, and I look forward to a very fruitful discussion with my guest. So joining me today via the phone will be the Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley, and the discussion will be centered around geothermal development in St. Kitts and Nevis. As you know, St. Kitts and Nevis recently secured funding for geothermal development, or for the geothermal project here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and I will be speaking with the Premier on what does this mean for St. Kitts and Nevis in particular. As you know, over the years, Nevis has been more of a front runner as it relates to geothermal development. And so we will be touching base with him shortly via the phone. Let me state that, remember, we only have one phone line, which is the 662-8674. So we won't be able to facilitate calls simultaneously. However, we will take your calls after, when we've discussed, when we've had the conversation, rather, with the Premier. The conversation, as I mentioned earlier, is surrounding geothermal development here in St. Kitts and Nevis. I think we have Mr. Brantley on the phone line now, so we'll touch base with him shortly. All right. Good morning, Mr. Brantley. Are you hearing me clearly?
I can hear you. Are you hearing me?
Awesome. I'm hearing you clearly as well. All right. So, as I was just saying, we have Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley, here on The Edge today. And the conversation is centered around geothermal development in St. Kitts and Nevis. As you know, St. Kitts and Nevis recently secured funding for geothermal development. Mr. Brantley, I want to get from you your initial reaction to the news that St. Kitts and Nevis had secured full funding for the geothermal energy project.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation. These are important opportunities to share information with our public and to keep them informed and updated on what's happening. In relation to the news of the funding, it is a matter that we have been working on collaboratively with the federal government since, I believe it was 2023. The National Assembly passed a resolution indicating that this resource would be exploited for the benefit of the entire Federation, and pledge a commitment of the federal government to partner with the NIA on bringing this resource to the fore for the benefit of all of our people. And as a consequence of that publicly stated cooperation, which was a public indication of what the Prime Minister and I had agreed upon privately, the efforts started to source funding. You may be aware that we originally had approved from the Caribbean Development Bank some $17 million US.
Yes.
But we did not. That would not have been enough to allow us to complete the drilling phase, which is to drill 3 production and 2 re-injection wells, so 5 wells total. So as a consequence, we had what we call a funding gap, and that was the effort. So we were very pleased when the Saudi Fund for Development indicated that they would, in fact, be providing the additional funding. I think it's about $20 million US to allow us to take care of this phase of the project. So where we are now is actually, I think, very exciting, because for the first time in the long and tortured history of geothermal, we finally have the funding in place to deal with the drilling of the production wells, which is critical and usually one of the more risky parts of the project in terms of the financial risk.
Mm-hmm. What are the expected long-term economic benefits for geothermal energy, or of geothermal energy for St. Kitts and Nevis? Or what do you expect coming out of this?
Well, the word that I've been using is transformational, because I think that what geothermal energy can do for us is to wean us off our current dependence on tourism and, of course, citizenship by investment. Not to suggest that those 2 aspects of our economy will not continue to be important, but I feel that geothermal has the ability to transform our economies in a way and allow us to become energy-based economies, and in this case, green energy-based economies. I have said that we can become the Norway of the Caribbean, except that Norway would have made its money and its economy based on fossil fuels, and we intend to do so in terms of green energy. Now, why do I say that very quickly? I say that because the current demand at peak in St. Kitts and Nevis is just about 50 megawatts of power. The geothermal potential is well in excess of 400 megawatts of power based on all the evidence that we've had thus far. Some are, in fact, predicting it could be much higher than 400 megawatts. But even if we treated it at the minimum of 400 megawatts, since our peak capacity at this point, our peak demand, is at 50 megawatts, it immediately you would realize that we have hundreds of megawatts of available power that we will need to find use for. That opens up the possibility of export of power via undersea cables to neighboring islands. And we have, because of where we are in the archipelago, we have islands that are close to us, in Barth, Saba, Statia, and Martin as examples. It immediately opens up the possibility of downstream uses, large data centers, for example, which could be developed here. And, of course, other uses. We've heard talk of green ammonia. We've heard talk of green hydrogen. We even heard talk of food processing, preservatives and the like. Any business or industry that uses large amounts of power can potentially find a home here in St. Kitts and Nevis. In addition, of course, the power that is anticipated from geothermal will be several multiples cheaper than the current fossil fuel energy. That, I think, is going to be absolutely critical for us, because it also allows us, therefore, to solve one of the fundamental problems we have with water, and it makes desalination more affordable. Of course, the reason why desalination is often problematic for us is the cost of electricity. So the models that I have seen have put the cost of geothermal per kilowatt hour at less than 11 cents. That compares to what is sometimes over 40 cents for fossil fuel generated energy. So the savings and the ability to have low cost energy, which is entirely renewable, doesn't do any damage to our environment or the climate. I think all of those are significant pluses. The last point I would make quickly is that it also weans us off reliance on fossil fuels and the volatility that fossil fuels and oil brings. Of course, every time there's a problem in the Middle East, there's a problem in Venezuela, oil prices spike upwards, and the consequence of that is that our people end up paying more and having a higher cost of living. It makes open economies like St. Kitts and Nevis completely vulnerable. So what geothermal also does, it insulates us from these exogenous shocks and allows us to better plan and develop our local economy.
Mm-hmm. Going back briefly to what you mentioned, the fact that St. Kitts and Nevis relies heavily on tourism, as you know, CBI, and the Prime Minister has been saying that, well, efforts have been made to wean St. Kitts and Nevis off of the CBI program, and we know now with this geothermal development, it means that we will no longer be so heavily reliant on fossil fuels here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Now, you also serve as leader of the opposition. So I want to look at political and leadership perspective. As leader of the opposition, how do you view the government's approach to securing this funding?
Well, it was a critical approach. And as I said, we were partnering on this and collaborating on this because without the funding, we can continue to talk about geothermal for another decade. Mm-hmm. You may be aware that this whole geothermal journey started way back in 2004. Mm-hmm. So it is now a 20-year odyssey on which Nevis has been on. And at every point, the fundamental problem has been the lack of funding. Mm-hmm. We have tried with various private companies. The original project was a Geocari project, which was initiated in 2004 under the auspices of the OAS, the Organization of American States. But at every step of the way, we have had a problem with funding. So this approach now and securing these funds is a monumental step forward.
Mm-hmm. All right. It is 11:13 and you're listening to The Edge here on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. I'm your host, Devonne Cornelius. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue the conversation with Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley, and we are speaking on the geothermal development here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, guess what? It's Radio Market.
Call in and sell your merchandise. You can negotiate and negotiate, give and trade.
We on radio, internet, and TV.
Like us, share us, and subscribe to
ZIZonline.com.
And remember, we don't sell nothing over $5,000. Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock right here on ZIZ Radio. Call 465-6120, 465-1903, 662-8674 or 718-577-2916. ZIZ Radio, giving back to the people.
From the heart of ZIZ Radio comes a political talk show like no other. The Edge, with host Devonne Cornelius giving you his take on the biggest stories happening in governance today. Got something to say? Let's hear it. Give us a call at 869-465-2555, Monday to Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 noon. One solid hour of in-depth analysis of the machinery that makes our country tick. The Edge, cutting into the matters at hand.
Hello and welcome back to The Edge here on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. I'm your host, Devonne Cornelius, and thank you for joining me on the program for today, Monday, March 3rd, 2025. On the program with me today via the phone is Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley, and the conversation is centered around geothermal development in St. Kitts and Nevis. Mr. Brantley, thank you for holding the line. So, looking at geothermal development infrastructure, you mentioned that this has been, or we've been looking at geothermal now since 2004, so about 20 years. Let's look at the environmental concerns or risks associated with drilling, and how will this project integrate with the existing energy infrastructure?
Well, in terms of the environmental impacts, those have been studied over the years. I must say a considerable amount of work has been completed. So EIAs have been done. Those have been published. Public consultations have been held. In fact, I recall a consultation in recent years at NEPAC here in Nevis. So there have been a number of discussions, and I remember that consultation at NEPAC, we had the seismologists from the University of West Indies who were actually a part of that discussion. So I think that on the environmental side, we anticipate that during the drilling phase, there will be some noise, but the expectation is, based on all that I've been advised, is that the operation of the plant thereafter should not generate any undue noise and certainly should not generate any pollution. The system we're using is what they call a closed loop, which is basically that we extract heat from the Earth's interior. That heat is used, converted to steam, turns turbines, and then the water is re-injected through the reinjection wells back into the Earth. So that is a system that is proposed. In terms of I think the other aspect of your question was how does it integrate?
Right.
There will be a need for some upgrades of the grid, both on Nevis and on St. Kitts. And so the costings have included the price of those upgrades. And I think the anticipation at this point, based on the model that I've seen, is that the plant that's generating the geothermal energy, that entity will transmit power to Nevlik, which will then be the entity that sells to the general public. In the case of St. Kitts and Skellig, there would be a similar arrangement once we have connected the two islands in terms of the undersea cables that are anticipated.
Looking at revenue generation, we have explored exporting geothermal energy in the past. Will this project allow St. Kitts and Nevis to sell power to neighboring islands?
Well, as I indicated, based on the forecast of how much energy is available, we will have the, frankly, enviable position of having excess energy. What we do with that excess energy would be a matter for us. As I explained, we can export that energy to neighboring islands. There are many islands in the arc that are available and where we can export efficiently. I mentioned the French islands, the Dutch islands as good examples. But we can also use that energy locally to significant off-takers, data centers, green ammonia, green hydrogen. Even some people talk about Bitcoin mining and the like. But anything, any industry that is going to use large amounts of energy, potentially we can ride in it.
Awesome. You are listening to the Edge here on ZIZ Radio, 96.1 FM. I'm your host, Devonne Cornelius, and on the phone line with me is Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley. Mr. Brantley, I want to talk quickly about investment and the global appeal. So St. Kitts and Nevis having a citizenship by investment program. Do you believe that this energy shift could attract more economic citizenship applicants or high value investors?
Well, as I indicated, part of certainly my vision is to wean us off the current dependence that we have on tourism and citizenship by investment, both of which are incredibly fickle. We saw in COVID that the tourism industry came to a grounding halt, and that resulted in many of our people being out of work and struggling. So we need to see how we can insulate ourselves from that. We also have, of course, a citizenship by investment business that we pioneered. We gave the world that idea way back in 1984. But the problem with that is that external powers can really dictate whether that survives or not. Europe, the United States, Canada, they can all have a significant impact on that. So again, that is largely outside our power to control. If we can get this geothermal energy going at the levels that we anticipate, then it would mean that we have a game changer. Again, going back to my word, transformation, transformative, we have something that really sets us apart regionally and, frankly, internationally, because we would have pivoted our entire economy to a renewable energy-based economy. Imagine, if you will, our entire tourism plant that is now green, our entire transportation sector, electric cars, electric scooters, electric vehicles generally. All of that now becomes possible and within reach with a clean, green, renewable, and affordable source of energy that is geothermal.
Awesome. It is 11:21 and you are listening to The Edge here on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. Now we've faced setbacks in the past as it relates to geothermal development. What lessons would you say have been learned from those experiences, and how do you believe they will ensure success this time with this project?
Well, I think the main lesson has to do with just the availability of funding.
Okay.
Many people assumed that if you dealt with a private company, for example, that they would be able to raise the necessary funding. We had two companies. We had West Indies Power that had control of this resource for a while. They weren't able to get the job done. We then had the Nevis Renewable Energy International, NREI. They were not able to get the job done. And we, frankly, did not have, over the years, the availability of financing, what I would call public financing, as we do now. I think as climate change has become more relevant, it has become top of the agenda globally, and more funding has therefore been made available by organizations, the Green Climate Fund, the IDB, CDB, various governments around the world. They've all now stepped up to the plate and really seen the value in projects like these. I think that has made it a lot easier to fund. Mega projects like these require funding, and it is not always possible to get the private sector to do it, because the private sector naturally is driven primarily by profit, and they would want guarantees, and they want to ensure that they're not going to lose. We need an element of public sector funding, and so the CDB came to our assistance with something called a contingency recoverable grant, which basically says that if we find the resource, then the money that they're providing to us becomes a long-term loan. If we do not find the resource when we do the drilling, then that money is a grant. Of course, they know that we will find the resource because the science has proven that the resource is there. But what this does is it takes the risk out of the drilling aspect of this project. And we know that many investors are risk averse. So the lower the risk, the more inclined people are to invest. And so these mechanisms have become important. And frankly, Devon, these mechanisms are not always available. So we can look back and we can say, well, time has been wasted. We've lost 2 decades. But in truth, the environment today, I think, is far more receptive to these types of ideas and these types of projects than it was 15 years ago.
Going back briefly to revenue generation, where we spoke about St. Kitts and Nevis possibly selling power to neighboring islands, we see that Dominica also has been making progress as it relates to geothermal. What are your thoughts on that? And do you know of, or are there intentions to have any conversation with Dominica?
Well, Dominica has done very well. We have, of course, are entirely supportive of their project. They too have been at this for a very long time. They have leaped ahead of us in the sense that they are actually now dealing with their plant construction. But based on what I'm seeing, the amount of power that they will generate from that plant would not even be sufficient yet for Dominica's needs. So Dominica's export of power, if they will go down that road, is still some years away. The likely prospects for Dominica is probably going to be Guadeloupe, which I think is in closer proximity to them than perhaps some of the other Eastern Caribbean islands, because the distance under the sea is going to be important. The longer the cables, the less efficient it becomes to transmit power. So have we been having conversation with Dominica on the technical side? Yes, our people from NEVLEC have visited. They have seen what is going on. There's a high degree of collaboration, lessons learned. The OECS as well has done very well, so the Secretariat in St. Lucia, in keeping us all abreast and informed of developments so that we have a pool of talent and sharing of resources and sharing of best practices that is currently happening at the moment. So we certainly welcome Dominica's development. We feel that it's important to show that these types of projects, geothermal projects, can succeed in the region. The only operating geothermal plant that I'm aware of in the Caribbean is at Bouillon in Guadeloupe, and Dominica will therefore be a welcome addition. We also are aware of efforts in Montserrat, next door to us, and certainly the Nevis effort that is ongoing. So we anticipate the possibility of our region being, having access to geothermal power as we all try to wean ourselves off fossil fuels and the uncertainty to prices and the volatility that is caused by that reliance.
Thank you so much. It's 11:28. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue the conversation here on The Edge. For those of you who are just tuning in, via the phone today with me is Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley, and the conversation is centered around geothermal development here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Whether it's a dress store on 4th Street, a snacket in Cayon, or a village grocery in St. Paul's, our small businesses play an important role in our economy. By supporting these businesses, you are helping to create or keep a job or two and to revive our economy. Support our local small businesses. Buy local and keep the doors to our small businesses open. This message is brought to you by ZIZ in support of our small businesses across the Federation.
Get ready to ignite your Tuesday nights with a show that's as educational as it is entertaining. Welcome to Pleasure Pulse, your weekly guide to the world of sex education. Join Roma every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. exclusively on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. It's the perfect way to spice up your midweek routine and get answers to all your burning questions. Whether you're looking for relationship advice or curious about the art of intimacy, Roma's got you covered. Pleasure Pulse, every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. only on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. Don't miss out. Your sex education journey starts this Tuesday with Roma as your guide.
From the heart of ZIZ Radio comes a political talk show like no other, The Edge, with host Devonne Cornelius giving you his take on the biggest stories happening in governance today. Got something to say? Let's hear it. Give us a call at 869-465-2555, Monday to Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 noon. One solid hour of in-depth analysis of the machinery that makes our country tick. The Edge, cutting into the matters at hand.
And we're back here on The Edge on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. I'm your host, Devonne Cornelius, and thank you for joining me in the program for today. Via the phone, we have Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley, and the conversation is centered around geothermal development in St. Kitts and Nevis. As I mentioned in my opening, St. Kitts and Nevis recently secured funding for geothermal development, which is historic and major news. Mr. Brantley, we spoke about earlier as it relates to setbacks when we're talking about geothermal here in St. Kitts and Nevis. How do you respond to critics who argue that previous geothermal efforts did not materialize?
Well, I mean, I don't know when you say how do I respond. Those are the facts. Previous efforts did not materialize. Mm-hmm. But we have not given up. We have continued to try. As I indicated to you, this process started way back in 2004 with an OAS-sponsored project called the GeoCaribe project. It involves St. Kitts and Nevis, it involves Dominica, St. Lucia, and the French islands of Guadeloupe and Martinique. That project in 2006 was abandoned in preference for a private sector-driven project with West Indies Power. That did not work out either. In fact, that led to litigation, if you recall. Mm-hmm. And that litigation was not resolved until, I believe, it was 2014. The then government in 2014 did a request for proposals, RFP, that was done with assistance from the United States State Department, the Energy Desk. A company was selected from that process called NREI, Nevis Renewable Energy International. They again failed to secure funding to move the project forward. And the result was that relationship was terminated. And then the Caribbean Development Bank was engaged. So various efforts have failed. We have now embarked on a pathway which for the first time has shown some success in that the CDB has approved $17 million US, and now the Saudi Development Fund has approved $20 million US, which combined gives us enough money to do the drilling that we need to do and the upgrades that are anticipated to allow us to move to the next phase of this project, which of course is the plant construction and making energy available to our people. So in terms of a response, it's like asking me, how do I respond to the fact that Devonne Cornelius was born a male? That's a fact. I don't know how else to put it. The reality is what it is, that we have had stops and starts, we've had failure along the way, but we have not stopped trying. Mm-hmm. And we are in a position now where I think is the best possible position that we've been in the last 20 years, because this is the first time we've actually secured funding.
Mm-hmm. What message do you have for the people of St. Kitts and Nevis about what role they could possibly play in energy transformation?
Well, I'm not sure that people can do too much, if I'm being honest, because this problem is a significant problem. It is a problem on a macro scale. Of course, we can do more in terms of conserve energy at our homes. We can use energy-efficient appliances. And for those who can't afford it, they can invest in, solar power for their homes, and so provide some ease in terms of their own power costs and the grid. But in terms of an overall game-changing initiative, going back to my word of an overall transformation, we really do need a large-scale renewable energy resource. And since we know that we have geothermal, we know that it is the best baseline power that's available, then I think that is the logical bet for us as a nation to exploit that to the benefit of all of our people, but also to exploit that for the economic advantages that we can achieve in securing our economy, insulating it from exogenous shocks, weaning us off fossil fuels completely. I have the headline in my head already, and I am hopeful that I live long enough to see that headline materialize, that Nevis is the greenest place on planet Earth. And that is what I believe we're working towards, to get to a position where our country, St. Kitts and Nevis, can stand in any forum in the world and proclaim that we have done what we could do to maximize the resources that we have, to leverage those resources for the ultimate benefit of our people.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Brantley, as we begin to wrap up this conversation, how do you see this project shaping the future of St. Kitts and Nevis? I know we've touched on different areas that could potentially benefit from this project coming on stream. But in other words, where do you see St. Kitts and Nevis, let's say 10 to 20 years from now? Or let's go in the middle and say 15. And finally, your overall thoughts on geothermal development.
My brother, in 15 years, I hope to be in an armchair somewhere looking on. If God is good enough to me to give me another 15 years, and I want whoever is at that point managing the affairs of St. Kitts and Nevis to be able to have at their disposal this resource, providing clean, cheap energy to our people, and to what I consider to be the economic transformation that it will cause. New jobs, new industries, the possibility of us becoming an exporter, a net exporter of energy. All of these now lie within our reach. I mentioned large-scale desalination to you. Our aquifers have been struggling to keep up with the demand for potable water. We now, with geothermal, have cheap energy. That means we can explore desalination on a large scale. That then means cheaper, more affordable water. It therefore means more water, means that all those farmers in St. Kitts and Nevis, those up in the hills, up in the mountains, they can access potable water. We know that rainfall patterns are inconsistent, so this is, again, a complete solution to provide water. Water, as we know, is critical for food production. And so I'm seeing a country in 15 years which has become energy self-sufficient. It has become water self-sufficient. It has become food self-sufficient. And so we see the exploration and achievement of geothermal energy as potentially ticking a number of boxes as we try to achieve this sustainable island state status that we have been working on. So my overall sense as we come to a close is that I'm incredibly positive. I'm incredibly optimistic. I believe that this has been a long and tortuous journey. We have had starts and stops. We've had difficulties. We've had litigation along the way. We've made some mistakes, to be sure. But I think, on balance, we are now within striking distance of really getting this project done and getting it done for the benefit of all of the people of our country. So from cotton ground to Keon should benefit from cleaner, cheaper energy. And that, I think, is a shared vision of the Honorable Prime Minister and myself, that St. Kitts and Nevis could work together to ensure that this project is brought to the fore to benefit all of our people and the transformation that we anticipate it will bring with it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brantley. It's 11:38, and we're going to bring this part of the conversation to a close. For those of you who just tuned in or may have just tuned in, I had via the phone with me today Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley, as we discussed geothermal development. As you know, St. Kitts and Nevis recently secured funding for geothermal development. Mr. Brantley, thank you so much for joining me in the conversation for today, and take good care.
Thank you very much, and anytime you need me, I'm just a phone call away. Thank you.
Awesome. Have a good one.
All right, great.
You're listening to The Edge here on ZIZ Radio, 96.1 FM. Today we had an important conversation about the future of energy in St. Kitts and Nevis. We've secured funding for geothermal energy, which could mean lower electricity bills, less dependence on fossil fuels, and a step closer to becoming a sustainable island state. As we know, the Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Terence Jew, and his administration, they have been focusing on initiatives that align with the sustainable island state or the sustainable island state agenda. the expected benefits for the people. We are looking at lower costs, energy security, challenges ahead, what we may foresee, of course, things, environmental concerns, but the environmental impact assessment, those things are ongoing, timelines, ensuring that these things are properly executed. And essentially, what does it mean for St. Kitts and Nevis? But before we wrap up, I want to give you, the people, the final word. What are your thoughts on geothermal development in St. Kitts and Nevis? As I mentioned, we've now secured funding, and it is now time for us to move forward and have this development delivered here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Other countries across the region have also been making strides, and St. Kitts and Nevis is going to be added to the list of countries that are exploring geothermal. It's 11:40. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue the conversation. You may call us at 662-8674. That is 662-8674. The phone lines are open, and we're taking your calls. We'll take a break. Stay with us.
ZIZ Radio, entertaining the nation, enjoyed by the world.
Get ready to ignite your Tuesday nights with a show that's as educational as it is entertaining. Welcome to Pleasure Pulse, your weekly guide to the world of sex education. Join Roma every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. exclusively on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. It's the perfect way to spice up your midweek routine and get answers to all your burning questions. Whether you're looking for relationship advice or curious about the art of intimacy, Roma's got you covered. Pleasure Pulse, every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. only on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. Don't miss out. Your sex education journey starts this Tuesday with Roma as your guide.
From the heart of ZIZ Radio comes a political talk show like no other. The Edge, with host Devonne Cornelius giving you his take on the biggest stories happening in governance today. Got something to say? Let's hear it. Give us a call at 869-465-2555, Monday to Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 noon. One solid hour of in-depth analysis of the machinery that makes our country tick. The Edge, cutting into the matters at hand.
The views and opinions expressed by participants and callers during this program are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of ZIZ Broadcasting Corporation, its management, or sponsors. The station accepts no responsibility for statements. Welcome back to The Edge on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. I'm your host, Devonne Cornelius, and thank you for joining me on the program. So I was looking at the live stream here, and a question came in. Kenya is one of the major geothermal energy producers. Any attempts are being made to collaborate with Kenya to facilitate geothermal energy on Nevis? So yes, in the sense that Kenya is a leading country in geothermal energy development. I'm not too privy about what's happening there in Kenya, but I know that they are hot for geothermal energy. But I'm going to definitely do some more read up on that. So thank you, caller, for informing me on that, or sharing that information with the public. Kenya is in fact a geothermal hotspot, or geothermal power in energy. The phone lines are open though, and we're taking your calls at 662-8674. That's 662-8674. Today we had via the phone Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley, and the conversation was centered around geothermal development here in St. Kitts and Nevis. So we know that geothermal energy has the potential to transform St. Kitts and Nevis, and there are a number of things, of course, that will be taken into consideration. The execution, keeping the public informed in terms of transparency, where we are with the project. But when you look at the benefits in terms of energy security and lower costs, not having to depend on the fossil fuels that come from the Middle East and so on is major, and we're talking about a significant decrease, that is, in the cost of energy. Every day, for years and years, we hear people speak about how challenging it is for them to pay their electricity bills. And the truth is, when the price of these fuels increase, of course, someone has to pay it here. And whether that cost is passed directly down to us as the consumers, or if that cost is somewhat absorbed by the government, somebody has to pay it. And even if it is absorbed by the government, one way or the other, it's going to come back down to us. And so to get out of that, tapping into natural resources, and what better way than to explore geothermal, something that we have here in St. Kitts and Nevis. The funding was secured earlier this month, I believe, earlier this month, and the Prime Minister elaborated on it during a sitting of the National Assembly last week. That was on the 27th, and it is over 30 million, or more than 30 million US dollars, and it is the initial phase of geothermal, which is the most critical stage to get started. And he said that that stage is most difficult to get investments for. And so he has partnered with the Premier of Nevis / the Nevis Island Administration, who also happens, and Premier Brantley also happens to be the leader of the opposition, to make sure that we could have secured the necessary funding. The Prime Minister emphasized the collaborative approach taken with Nevis on this project, despite political differences. We know, as I mentioned earlier in the program, that Nevis has been a front runner as it relates to geothermal. More than 20 years now we've been hearing about geothermal, and so it's really good to see that funding has been secured, and we're going to see some sort of movement on that. If we have no calls, we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll begin wrapping up the conversation here on The Edge. Stay with us.
Hey, guess what? It's Radio Market.
Call in and sell your merchandise. You can negotiate, give and trade.
We on radio, internet, and TV.
Like us, share us, and subscribe to
ZIZonline.com.
And remember, we don't sell nothing over $5,000. Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock right here on ZIZ Radio. Call 465-6120, 465-1903, 662-8674, or 718-577-2916. ZIZ Radio, giving back to the people.
Whether it's a dress store on 4th Street, a snack in Keyon, or a village grocery in St. Paul's, our small businesses play an important role in our economy. By supporting these businesses, you are helping to create or keep a job or two and to revive our economy. Support our local small businesses. Buy local and keep the doors to our small businesses open. This message is brought to you by ZIZ in support of our small businesses across the Federation.
Welcome back to The Edge on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. I'm your host, Devonne Cornelius, and thank you for joining me in the program for today, Monday, March 3rd, 2025. It is 11:51, and we are winding down. We're closing the conversation, and of course, we close for noon as we prepare for our midday newscast. But for those of you who may have joined the conversation late, I had via the phone today Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley, who also serves as leader of the opposition in the National Assembly of St. Kitts and Nevis. And the conversation was centered around geothermal. The conversation was centered around geothermal development here in St. Kitts and Nevis, with us securing funding for geothermal, and of course discussing with Premier Brantley in terms of what does this mean for St. Kitts and Nevis and our current reliance on tourism and the Citizenship by Investment program. I spoke earlier last week about us being heavily reliant on tourism and the CBI program. And even though I believe, as it is now, tourism is the bread and butter of the Caribbean, as most countries in the Caribbean rely heavily on revenue from the tourism industry, it is still important for us to invest and tap into other areas of the economy so as not to have all of our eggs in one basket, especially as small island developing states that are very susceptible to natural disasters. We are seeing where hurricanes are getting stronger and stronger, and so we have to find new and innovative ways to stimulate and to diversify our economy to ensure that there are long-term jobs, sustainable jobs, and to ensure that everyone is eating, everyone is able to keep their heads above the water. And so there are other countries or islands in the region that have been exploring geothermal development, and St. Kitts and Nevis is now joining the list of countries with geothermal development as we have secured funding. When we look at the Sustainable Island State agenda that is being pushed here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we're seeing where the government has made investments to begin construction on a climate-smart hospital. And the idea with the climate-smart hospital is not just to say you're building a new hospital, but you want infrastructure that is sound infrastructure that could respond and adapt to the changing climate. And so it may sound easy to just go and put a bucket of paint, a gallon of paint on. Well, I don't think a gallon of paint could cover the existing facility. But you get the point I'm making. Put some paint on the current GNF. That is not going to solve the problems. And we have to make those investments as they are necessary. When I looked at the IMF report spoke about the need for natural disaster preparedness. And in that report, it made mention of the fact that we need to invest more in infrastructure that could adapt or respond to the changing climate. In particular, hurricanes. Of course, there are other natural disasters, but in particular, hurricanes. These hurricanes are getting stronger and stronger, and we have to find ways of adapting, because there's nothing that we could really do about the hurricanes intensifying. However, we must learn to adapt, and we must learn to respond to these natural disasters and these threats when they come. But geothermal development in St. Kitts and Nevis is what it is now, and we look forward to the benefits that are going to be derived from that development here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We're looking at energy security, energy costs. What does this mean for the business sector and for those companies that consume large amounts of electricity? And currently we rely heavily on fossil fuels. But now tapping into geothermal energy, we will no longer have that heavy reliance on the fossil fuels. And for me, that is major. That is absolutely major. We're talking about jobs, and not just short-term jobs, but long-term jobs, and jobs that are sustainable. So this is good news, and it is news that is welcomed. I gave my thoughts some time back as it relates to geothermal energy, and there were people who were they were unsure. They were a bit skeptical as it relates to geothermal. And why? Because we know we've been talking about this now for more than 2 decades. And so for some people, it felt as though, man, we're not going to hear anything, or we're not going to see anything tangible, or we're not going to see anything materialize. But now we're seeing something positive, and we look forward to the benefits that are going to be derived from having geothermal development in St. Kitts and Nevis. We mentioned other countries such as Dominica that is exploring geothermal, and we know conversations are happening as it relates to how we here in St. Kitts and Nevis can export some of this energy to neighboring islands. And so we're seeing right there autonomy and revenue generation right there. We're out of time, and so I'm going to have to bring this conversation to a close, but it's been a good conversation. And once again, thank you to Premier Matt Brantley for joining me on the program for today to talk about. Been listening to The Edge here on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. I've been your host, Devonne Cornelius, and thank you so much for joining me on the program for today. See you tomorrow, same time, same station. God spare my life and yours. You guys have a good one.